Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. If you were anything like me, you used to toss a ball against the house for hours a day. However, that did not lead me to having incredible abilities worth writing a novel about. But Morris Hoffman's debut novel, Pinch Hitting, follows Harold Fungo and his improbable career as a guy who can always get a hit and put the ball wherever he wants. But that's only half of it, as Harold's story is told from the perspective of Joe Skelton, a regular guy who is suffering from a brain tumor, who tells his wife the tale of Harold. It follows in the footsteps of books like The Natural and The Fireballer, which focus on players with incredible talents. But it's also so much more. I had a great chat with Morris, who has some pretty good stories of his own to tell. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Morris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Scott?
You know what? I'm doing fantastic. By the time this comes out, I will have just got back from the World Series, which is an incredible thing. I'm very, very excited. But before we start talking about your book, you have a very interesting background. What did you do before you became a fiction writer?
I was a lawyer, and then for 30 years, I was a trial judge.
So how does a lawyer and then trial judge end up writing a baseball novel?
It was very, very strange. I mean, as a lawyer and especially as a judge, I did a lot of writing in my professional career. And then when I retired on a Friday, and on Monday, I started writing this book. I had never written fiction before. I was sort of mulling about this idea for a couple months before my retirement, but just the core of an idea. And then I just started writing. I don't know where it came from. I wasn't planning who the characters were going to be. It sort of just spilled out. And in some ways, the book itself is, in addition to being about baseball, is about this mystery of writing, which is still a mystery to me.
I was going to get there. I was going to ask you the character of Joe, if that is actually a little bit of you and your process with writing as you go through. First of all, who is Joe, and what is his little bit of background about him?
So Joe is one of the two protagonists, and he has a brain tumor. That part's not autobiographical. I'm okay. And the brain tumor makes him write a novel. And he's never written anything in his life. He's hardly ever read anything in his life except the sports pages. And so this brain tumor makes him write this novel. And it just comes out. It comes out at night. He sort of sleep talks the novel. And his wife, Catherine, writes the words down. He doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know where their story is going. And this was a little bit like how this book came out for me. It sort of came out in, as I put it in the book, barrels of paragraphs already done. I don't know how it happened. It was quite mysterious. And it took me only about 6 weeks to write it, and then about a year to edit it. That's not the fun thing. But the writing was quite mysterious.
6 weeks is pretty fast for a book, especially a book that is, I would say, unconventional storytelling. I think that is not your typical setup for a baseball book, let alone a lot of books that I've read. Can you just sort of give a setup for how the book is presented?
Yes. So it starts as a baseball book. So you're introduced to the other protagonist, Harold Fungo. And Harold Fungo is a handicapped man who is a perfect hitter. I hate to say these words to you, Scott, because I know you're a pitcher.
I already don't like him, yeah.
The idea that someone could go to the plate and not only get a hit every time, but hit the ball anywhere he wants to. That's what the sort of first part of the book is. And then you realize 4 or 5 chapters in that this is just a story. And it's a story being imagined by this Joe character who has a brain tumor. And the rest of the book then becomes a race between whether Joe's going to survive long enough to finish the story so that we find out whether Harold ever makes it to the big leagues or not.
I want to go back and talk a little bit about Harold. You give him a great nickname, the Jolton Janitor, which is just a fantastic nickname. I How does he develop these skills? What can you say about him and his life at this point?
He's the he- he's the son of a single mother who's deaf, and the way he developed his, and this comes out all much later in the book.
Yeah.
So this is a spoiler alert of sorts. He develops these skills because he's all alone with his mother. He doesn't go to school. Um, uh, and what he does all day long is hit a ball against a wall in his backyard. Something that most of us did all day long, I
Yeah.
think.
I
But
was throwing the ball. Yeah. But yeah.
you were
Side
throwing
of the
it.
house, tennis ball against the wall. Yep. All day. Yep.
He did it 4 or 5 hours a day for 30 years. So he stuck to it longer than any of us
Yeah.
did. And that's why he's a perfect hitter. And he's discovered accidentally. He's the janitor at the minor league ballpark. And one day the folks on the grounds crew are playing around with the brand new pitching machine, and they ask him sort of sarcastically whether he'd like to come down and try to hit some balls. And so he does, and he hits every one of them.
It's amazing. It's a little bit of almost like The Natural, I guess you could say. There's a little bit of elements of that, this kind of this talent that just kind of appears and has this otherworldly ability. I don't want to say too more about much about his journey here because it is a fascinating journey that he goes on. Um, but he does have this very unique skill set. I wanted to ask you about what went into sort of the research of this book. Did you get into, you know, contact hitting, pinch hitting, that kind of stuff? What was going on in your research, or did this just all kind of come from your head?
Zero research. Well, you have to say, in the year that I was editing it, there was a little bit of research. There are parts of the book that talk about real players, for example, real handicap players, and other cups of coffee players that only lasted a day or two. And I went back after this book sort of just came out. I went back and filled in the names of those players with real players. So I did a little research about that, but that was pretty much it.
So there wasn't necessarily a player or a story that you had in mind when you were working on this. This was all just from your head, essentially.
Yeah, not only from my head, but sort of just immediately from my head without very much thought into it. My wife thinks that the psychiatric explanation for the book is that I was such a terrible hitter um, that Harold is everything that I never was.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about that.
Well, I suppose this is maybe your kind of dream. This is what you wish you could have been, and then that's kind of how that comes out, which I think how a lot of these things sort of happen. Were you sitting in court and like thinking about this at all, or was this just kind of a thing that happened naturally later on?
The idea started bubbling around a couple months before I retired. It wasn't while I was in trial. It wasn't while I was ruling on objections or sentencing folks. It was later, at night. The idea.
Was it always going to be this dual narrative? Was that an important aspect of it for you?
Yes, it always was. The idea was somebody's dying of cancer and he writes a baseball book. That was it. I didn't know who the baseball hero was going to be. I didn't know when I started writing it, really, that he was going to be a perfect hitter. I'd moved a lot of things around during the editing process. The original draft of the book started with Joe writing this book at night by talking it. And but I switched it around so it begins with baseball. I thought that might be more grabby for readers.
Are you a baseball reader? Where's your fandom for baseball at this point right now?
Oh, I've gotten to be more of a fan since I wrote the books than I was before. So when I was growing up, I loved our minor league team, the Denver Bears. My
Hmm.
father took me to lots and lots of games. He sort of appears in various forms in the book. And we both of us were very sad when a major league team came to Denver. Maybe we were
Really?
the only people in the city who were sad about it.
Well, it is unfortunate it was the Rockies, but yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
I use the word major league team in its loosest form.
Uh, it's a shame what's going on over there right now. I don't know if they even know what's going on, but
Oh,
anyway, sorry.
I don't know a whole lot about baseball, but I know a car wreck when I see it,
It's not great. No,
and that's a
no,
car wreck.
no. Um, so there's these chapters. Each chapter kind of starts off with. Actually, go ahead and tell us how does each chapter start off here?
Well, a little bit differently. So, part one of the ideas that came later in the editing process was Roger Angell had just died. Roger Angell, the famous baseball writer from the New Yorker, he had died maybe a year before, and I was thinking a lot about him, and I was going back and reading some of his wonderful stuff. And in the editing process, I thought, hey, let's try to tie these stories together because they're a little bit discombobulated because there's two stories and
Hmm.
the book keeps going back and forth between the two of them. And I thought, and I actually had an editor who had this idea. She said, "Let's get a journalist to tie the baseball stories together." And then it was my idea to get Roger Angell to tie some of the stories together.
Yeah.
And so some of the chapters start with fictional segments of from a Roger Angell biography of Harold Fungo. Um, and then other chapters start with just a local, because I love reading local sports. The worse they are, the better they are.
Yeah.
It is a mystery itself. And so I tried to capture that in some of the chapters with an unnamed local sports writer who's talking about the local minor league team and then this phenomenon of this can't miss batter.
I thought that was really clever because if you look at the book, you could almost make it two different books. I assumed when you started writing this book that you had the Herald stuff, like that's what you wrote, and then you're like, well, I need a device or something to sort of like put this through. And I guess it was sort of almost the other way around.
Yes,
Huh.
it was so much fun. It was so much fun to write.
Did you go through various feats that Harold could achieve? Because you end up on this sort of like this perfect pinch hitting kind of player. Did you think about like a guy who could throw perfect games or throw 150 or was it always just this idea of hitting?
Once it didn't start with any idea about what the baseball hero would be, but
Yeah.
once I settled for apparently psychiatric reasons on a perfect hitter, then I stuck with that. There have been, of course, other baseball books about people who could really throw the ball fast.
So I'm always fascinated in writing baseball. We publish 12 to 15 short stories about baseball every year. You've now gone on, and I believe you're working on other works at this point. Were there specific challenges you found about writing a baseball book?
Well, because it just came out, because of the way this happened so mysteriously, it's embarrassing to say that I didn't give much thought to any of this stuff. It just came out, and even in the editing process, it was more of a sort of technical question about how to present things. But the core of the story and the how to write about baseball, I will say that it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out how could he really do well when he can't run to first base. So this was something that was sort of a constant problem, and I sort of he evolved. There was a sort of an arms race, so to speak, between pitchers and Harold, and they started throwing at him and trying to walk him, and at some point they even roll the ball to him because they can't intentionally walk him because he reaches out and hits the ball. And that was, I guess, of all the things in the book that maybe I'm not entirely comfortable with, that's one of them. And when real baseball people like you have told me about that, you know, he couldn't reach out 3 feet and hit the ball.
But you know what? I can think of a video in my mind of Miguel Cabrera on an intentional walk. Back when they throw the
Oh,
intentional walks, and
yeah,
he squares it up and he lines it into right field. And I can picture this, and I can see someone with that kind of extension and the hand-eye coordination. That to me is not unbelievable. I believe that. Yeah,
I do
yeah.
remember that on a couple occasions, batters have reached out and hit intentional walks back in the good old days when the pitcher had
Yeah.
to throw them.
I do miss intentional. It's so anticlimactic when you just send the guy to first base now.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's too bad. Yeah,
It's not baseball, it's bureaucracy, right? You
yeah.
just elect. By the way, who makes that call? Is that the manager?
It must be the manager sending it in there. Yeah, because although you
How
know
does
what, there was that video this year of Garrett Cole holding up the four fingers and walking. Was it Alvarez? I think on the Astros. So I don't know if it's coming from him or the. I always assume the manager's making that call. Maybe the pitcher also has a say in it too. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I will say, interestingly, the game now is not a contact game. It's a much more of a swing and a miss game and a home run
right.
game. So Harold is a little bit um, not necessarily of this time, but I think you're starting to see it come back a little bit more. Like Stephen Kwan on Cleveland had, I don't know, 1,000 hits this postseason, and you're also seeing now pinch hitters get used a lot more. I think you're seeing managers play matchups and saving guys for different spots. Um, were you aware, taking into consideration at all, today's current game as you were writing this book?
Not really. Remember, I wasn't aware of anything when I was writing this book. It just, but looking back at it, and I had never thought of the point you just made, which is that Harold is slightly out of touch now with the way the game's gone. I am aware of how the game's gone, and I sort of grieve for that. It was much more interesting when when there was small ball and there was it was just much more interesting for me at least. A home run to me is like a dunk in basketball. I guess it's there. It's really in some ways different because a dunk is really easy and a home run is really hard. But it's all show and sort of no go for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. I really do. And I do think that someone like Harold would be a sensation today. I mean, even with the way the game is today, a guy with that kind of ability, I think it would almost revolutionize the game if a guy like that comes up who can just constantly hit the ball, put the ball in play.
Not only put the ball in play, but put it in play anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is,
So
it's frustrating. When I would play, I was taught very young to hit the ball to right field as a right-hander. Like you can hit the ball to right, you can pull the ball, and you see the shift. You see guys who just can't do that, and so it is this kind of lost art that the game has completely moved away from. I think Harold he would be a superstar, as have this sort of the same kind of attention that he receives in your book in today's game, even though that's not the way it's played anymore. Um, which is great. It was very relatable. We still talk about DiMaggio's hit streak, and it's not really relevant to the way the game's played today. So a
right.
guy like him would still be a huge deal.
Well, I'm glad you think so. We have to talk about the Casey Award.
Oh, yes. So you just heard about it last week. Is that correct?
Yes. So I asked them because I wanted to be very careful about this, whether I could let the cat out of the bag, and they said yes, but only if you plug us. And so I said sure. They emailed me. I think it was Thursday, and told me that I was a finalist for the Casey Award, and that they were going to have an official announcement toward the end of this week. So I don't know who the other nominees are, but it's such an honor to be in this group. I have to say I had never heard of the Casey Awards um, until and I can't remember. It might have been through Mark Stevens's book, The Fireballer, because I knew he was a finalist,
Yeah.
and sent my book to them. It's an award given every year for the last 40 years. I think it started in 1983. Yeah, by the editors of Spitball magazine, and some really top-notch people have have been nominated. People like, David Halberstam and Roger Angel. Um, in fact, those two I don't think have ever won it, which is also astonishing. And the other cool thing, I guess, cool but also um, maddening in some ways, is that they don't distinguish between fiction and nonfiction. So there's
Yeah.
many more baseball nonfiction books by, I don't know, a factor of 10
Yeah.
written every year than there are fiction books. So
What they we're very aware of what they do, and the Casey Award is a huge deal. It's the biggest baseball writing award, but we saw that and we thought it leaned too heavily on nonfiction.
good
And
for you.
I thought that we now give out a nonfiction, a fiction, and a poetry, and because there's actually a lot more baseball poetry out there than you think, and I don't think they have much of a shot of ever winning anything. So we really thought we wanted to try to recognize those people too. But this is the big award, and for you to be a finalist is such a achievement, especially for your debut novel.
I'm very excited about it. I hope my publisher gets excited. So far, not too much excitement.
Well, wait until the announcement happens, and then I believe they have like an awards ceremony, like a dinner or something like that. Yeah,
That's the one of the most fun things is that it's at a sports and karaoke bar in Cincinnati.
of
And
all places. Yeah.
so when I posted this, I put this put this out, and my wife said, "I'm not going to Cincinnati to a karaoke bar. I'm sorry, you're on your own." So I may have to be on my own. I don't know.
You have to go. You have to
Oh
go.
yes, and the cool thing is, they don't just invite the winner; they invite the nominees too. So I think this means I now can go no matter what happens.
Do you now consider yourself a baseball writer?
Probably not. I don't think so.
You're a award nominated baseball writer in my eyes. So
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I'm working on book 4. The other 2 haven't sold yet. I'm still talking with publishers, but none of them. Baseball flits in and out of the last 2 of them, but none of them is really about baseball in the way this book is about baseball. And of course, the old saw is that no really good baseball book is about baseball. I think baseball fiction lovers hate when people say that. I don't know if you hate that, but so
I we've had a lot of conversations about this, and I always tell people that the best baseball writing that we get, it's never really about baseball. And that is the cliche. That it like because
right,
it's great when a guy throws a 3-2 slider and gets the call on the outside corner or whatever. But like we don't really care about that. We want to know about the people, about the human attachment to it. And I
right,
always say, any game you go to, there are 40,000 people at, and they all experience that game in a different way. And so there's 40,000 stories at each game you go to there.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, this is maybe perhaps the best example of a book where I was going to ask you, do you even consider is this a baseball book in your mind?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's baseball in it. There's certainly
It's a
that,
huge part of it. Yeah.
and I spent some time through Roger Angel's fictional voice, mainly commenting on some of the mysteries of baseball that analogize to the mysteries of life, chance and fate, and all those wonderful things that are in baseball that make us love it. Um, but I think it's probably not really a baseball book. Although I did put some baseballs on the cover. So,
Which, I'm glad you did, because I would count it as a baseball book. You could very easily say it's not. It just has a component, but I think that it is such a central part to that story. and the driving force emotionally. I mean, it comes from the baseball aspect of it.
And we haven't mentioned this, and I won't spoil it, but there is a big surprise on the last page of the book.
I've been
So
so nervous to mention it, and I'm trying very hard not to. But yes,
we won't say what it is.
I'm
But
trying my hardest. Yeah, it's been right there a couple times, and I'm like, no, 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 can't do it. But no, this is exactly what a baseball book I think should be, where it's a huge component of it, but it's really about the people. And this one just happens to have one of the people is almost completely unrelated to baseball, which is very unique. I mean, Joe is not a baseball guy, really.
he played in high school. And,
But he's he's not like in the game or anything like that.
right,
So
right.
he's just kind of like a guy, and you really end up caring about him through his baseball stories.
There
So
are a bunch of other characters who have nothing to do with baseball. One important character is a Samoan guy. And when my wife was the first one to read the manuscript, and she kept saying, "Where did this come from?" That's what she kept saying. And in fact, I have Catherine, Joe's wife, repeating what my wife would often say when she was reading this manuscript: "Is where did this come from? You don't know any Samoans." Um, and
I
the
love
book's
that.
characters like that.
Was there a character that was most fun for you to write?
Joe's World War II experience was made me think a lot of my father. So in that sense, that was maybe the most meaningful part of the writing. But the most fun was the Samoan Paul. Um, he's everything I'm not. He's gregarious. He laughs with people. He loves everybody. He's um, yeah. That character was the most fun one I think to write.
You had the opportunity in July to throw out the first pitch at a game, and you also took BP on the field. Is that right?
In a batting cage.
In the batting cage. In the batting cage. How did this come about? What was this experience like for you?
Well, it came about just fortuitously. I knew there was this book. It's a really interesting book. I recommend it to everybody, called Life Ain't the Same in the Pecos League. And it's by Bill Rogan. And it's basically a diary. He writes down day by day about what he does as his first year as a manager, his
Mm.
first year as a manager anywhere. And it's in the independent league for the Tucson Saguaros, I think it was their name. And it's just if you want to get to know the sort of seedy underbelly of independent professional baseball, that's a book you have to read. So it was on my list and I hadn't read it. And I felt guilty about not reading it. But when my publisher said you got to go find some folks to give you some blurbs, I thought of Bill Rogan. So I reached out to him. I'd never met him. He was very kind. He said, "Sure, I'd love to read your book." He did. He loved it. He ended up writing a blurb for it. And then I emailed him and said, "Bill, we're having a signing party in Denver in July. Would you come?" And he said, "We're in the middle of the season. Remember, I'm still managing a baseball team." He was managing the Marysville Drake in the Pecos League. And he said, "But I know what. Why don't you come to Marysville and we'll do a book signing event and you can throw out the first pitch." So that's what we did. It was so much fun. I practiced for 2 months trying to throw a baseball 60 and a half feet because I wanted to throw from the rubber.
Yeah.
Um, and it's far.
It's really far. Yeah.
And if you haven't done it in a while, it's amazingly far. And he also said, "And you can come out during BP and shag some fly balls." And I thought, oh my God, no way am I shagging fly balls. "And you can do batting practice." And I said, "I don't think so." And then, friends started to tell me, "You will never get to do this again in your life. This is something that most people don't get to do. Do everything." So I did everything except shag fly balls. It was 102 at
Oh my
game
god.
time. So I said, "I'm not going to go out in the sun and and shag fly balls." But I did do batting practice in the cage, and it was so much fun. It really was.
Was someone throwing or was it off a machine?
Bill was throwing, and he was throwing mostly grannies. I asked him to get a little more serious, and it got a little faster, but he was worried about killing me. I'm 72 years old. And then I go out to do the first pitch, and on my way out, he whispers to me, and I'm ready. I'm ready to really throw it well, to throw a strike, to not loop a granny ball. And he whispers to me, whatever you do, don't bounce it. They will boo you if you bounce it. So now I'm freaking out. And so instead of throwing the way I'd practiced for 2 months, I throw a granny loop. It does get to the plate. It was a strike, I would say. But it was so much fun. And what was most fun about this trip was these players in this league, they get $100 a week or something to play.
Yeah.
This is where, if you're playing in this league, you love baseball. You're not doing it because you have much of a shot to go anywhere else. And most of these kids were very, very young, just out of junior college. A couple of them were older, taking their last shot at professional baseball, and to just be around people who were willing to risk what they're risking, just for the love of the game was quite moving.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little teared up right now.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. That's such a great experience. I almost wish you got a chance to do this before you wrote the book. I don't know if it would have changed any way you wrote the book at all or not, but
Maybe it would have been about a perfect pitcher who didn't throw looping granny ball.
Hey, but if it's a strike, it's a strike. I mean, and again, he is right. You just can't bounce it. You don't want to bounce it.
The funniest thing was the catcher popped up and he ran them, and these kids are like 19 years old. I have clothes older than all of these players. He jumped up and he said, "Way to go, man." And I said, "I think that was low. I think it was low. Was that a strike?" And he said, "That guy would have swung on it. Don't worry about it, man." They were all really, really extraordinarily nice.
That's so cool. How was your swing? How did your swing compare to Harold?
Oh, well, I only had 4 or 5 years of practice, and he had 30 years. Considering I could never hit my weight, and this was back when I was very young and weighed 150. It was good. I could hit it. I was surprised. I was quite surprised at it.
What a great story. What a great outcome. You've had a couple great things happen to you since this book has come out. I mean, the Casey Award, doing some baseball. I've never done these baseball things before. Like you're doing some pretty cool stuff. So it is amazing to see.
You're getting to play baseball in Italy, though, so
that's good. That's good. I'm not gonna lie, that's good. But I've never done anything like that. I've never thrown a first pitch or taken BP or been offered to shag flies and stuff like that at a real game. That's a really cool experience.
Well, to just put some perspective on it, there were several folks who threw out first pitches that night. I was the first one, but right after me was a 7-year-old kid, so who won a ticket lottery. So.
Oh yeah, they won a lottery. You wrote a book.
I am sure, Scott, you can find a minor league baseball team that will let you throw out the first pitch.
Next year, that's the goal. We're going to make this happen next year.
By the way, I'm not sure I should say this, and you can edit it out if you don't want to, but people ask me, so how were the book sales at this event? I sold one book. One book. And guess who it was to? It was to one of Bill Rogan's players.
Really?
Yes, the nicest kid who came up to me and asked me if I would please sign it for his dad.
Oh.
So I signed it for his dad. So that one book was worth it. I would rather that one book for this kid's dad than sign 50 for somebody else. He gave me $20. That's what I was charging for the book. And I gave it back to him. I said, I don't know how much you guys make every game. He said, no, I insist. It was really quite sweet.
That was Morris Hoffman. His novel Pinch Hitting is out now. To close us out, we have Christy Bell reading an excerpt from her short story Playing Baseball on Outsider Island from our 17th issue.
They wheeled into the parking lot, and the beauty of the Richland Community Youth Baseball field took his breath. Addie jumped out, mouth gaping, absorbing the scene through his pores, imagining himself in the big leagues. Skip Carey announced his name in the Braves starting lineup, right between Andrew and Chipper, the Lee Cream and a Jones Oreo. He'd say it like that, too, because that was the way Skip Carey talked. Not that Addie had been to a game. He watched all the games he could on TV, though. Uncle Alvin lived next door and got them on TBS. Here at Barker Field, to Addie's dismay, he was late to the show. Kids had already paired off and were zipping balls back and forth to warm up. The air rang with the smack of hard ball and soft leather, and voices in various stages of changing. "Ow!" One kid took off his glove to shake it out. "You burned my hand with that throw." They all seemed to know each other. Addie checked his mitt laces and licked his lips. He drank in the details. The other boys' new cleats left pocks in the infield, and crisp chalk baselines practically leapt off red clay. 3 puffy cumulus clouds cast moving shadows over the outfield, where green grass contrasted so sharply against blue sky it hurt his eyes. A man's voice boomed over the field loudspeaker and directed the boys by last name to center field, where they would take fly balls off a coach's bat. "Attaboy, Addie!" Addison 3 took up station in the bleachers, paper sack with a fresh beer at his feet. He clapped a little. "Show 'em what you got." Addie waved and jogged toward the outfield. For once his dad was here to watch him, just him, and he felt confident, happy, invincible. "Look at that kid, Dad!" A stocky youngster with a crew cut pointed in Addie's direction as he ran past them. Addie only had to wonder for a second why he'd attracted the other boys' attention. "He don't even have cleats." Crewcut's dad shushed him, but not before the boy blurted the rest. "And he's got a catcher's mitt instead of a glove."
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. You can support us on Patreon. Until next time,